I knew that party had never been for me, from the second I walked into the house and saw Noah Morgan standing in the middle of the living room as if the whole place had been arranged to reflect his happiness. Daniel Hughes kept clapping him on the shoulder, his voice thick with pride, as he brought up Noah's recent nomination for a new position at work. Mia White stood beside a custom cake made in the exact flavor Noah had loved since he was little, and her eyes softened every time he smiled. The way they looked at Noah always made me feel less like their daughter and more like someone who had shown up at the wrong address. I stood at the edge of the table with a glass of water I hadn't taken a single sip from. No one told me to leave, but no one asked me to come closer either. That was the worst part about being pushed to the margins in your own home. Everything happened just politely enough that I couldn't point at anyone and call them cruel, but clearly enough that I understood I had never once been placed on the same level as Noah. His gifts were wrapped carefully and set neatly on the armchair, like an essential part of the evening. Every birthday wish for him sounded polished and tender, as if they had all rehearsed it in their heads for days. I reminded myself not to let anything show. This wasn't new. It was just that tonight, the imbalance stood out sharp as a blade, so sharp I could no longer lie to myself and pretend I was only being too sensitive. When Daniel raised his glass to toast Noah, old birthdays of mine flashed through my mind. A cake bought in a rush after work. A birthday wish tossed out while someone was doing the dishes. A gift handed over like they were just checking off an obligation. One year, my birthday was postponed because Noah had a competition schedule. Another year, Mia said it would be easier to celebrate over the weekend, and then the weekend passed as if that promise had never been made. Every time, I swallowed the same old question. Why was it that when it came to me, everything could always wait? Noah never had to actively hurt me. All he had to do was be used to being chosen first. That casual acceptance in him was what exhausted me most. Noah smiled, accepted congratulations, opened gifts, thanked everyone one by one as if this was simply the natural order of his life. I glanced over at Zoe Collins and Mason Marshall, two friends who had been invited to the party. Zoe was quieter than usual. Mason looked at me once, then over at Daniel and Mia, and something in his expression tightened. That one look was enough for me to know that, finally, someone else had seen the strain I had been living with for years. The party was nearly over. The lights were still on. There was still laughter in the room. But for me, everything had already started to go cold. Daniel suddenly turned toward me, as if he had just remembered there was one more person in the house. He bent over the side table, picked up a small box, and lightly tossed it toward me. It hit the tabletop, slid a short distance, and stopped right in front of my hand. "This is yours." His voice was flat, as if he were tossing me the scrap of attention left over after giving Noah the best of everything. I looked at the box. It was almost weightless, wrapped carelessly, the taped edge crooked. I felt my heart sink before I even opened it, but I still did, right there in front of everyone. Inside was a joke box, the cheap kind of toy that pops out something stupid for a laugh. There was no real gift, just a joke. I looked up. A room that had been full of sound a second ago suddenly felt like someone had squeezed the air out of it. "What is this supposed to mean?" My voice was short and cold, clear enough that no one could pretend not to hear me. Daniel didn't answer right away. Mia folded her arms across her chest, the corner of her mouth lifting into a thin smile, tired and irritated, as if I were the one ruining the mood. I waited. I wanted one of them to say it plainly, to tear down the last curtain with their own hands, instead of forcing me to keep playing the well-behaved daughter. Then Mia spoke, her voice sharp and final, like the words had been sitting inside her for a long time, waiting for an excuse to come out. "Because you were never supposed to be born." I heard every word, every single one. Zoe sucked in a sharp breath. Mason turned to stare at Mia like he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Noah froze, still holding his glass, his face gone pale. And somehow, his reaction was what hurt the most. Not because he felt my pain, but because he looked like someone hearing something he should have known all along, just never expected to hear said out loud in the middle of the living room. For one beat, I thought I might shatter right there, but the shock didn't knock me down. It went straight through me, then froze into something hard and cold and sharp, something even I hadn't known I was capable of. I set the box down on the table very gently. That movement was calmer than my voice when I spoke. If you want to know what's really funny, I said, looking straight at Daniel and then at Mia. I can tell everyone right now. That was when I saw Daniel's face change first. Fast, but not fast enough to miss. Mia faltered too. Noah blinked, his hand tightening around the glass. It was only the briefest flicker of panic across their faces, but for me, it was enough. A careless slip doesn't create that kind of fear. Only a secret does. I didn't wait for anyone to say another word. I turned and walked out of the living room, heading straight for the door as if I slowed down for even one more second, they would drag me back into my old role again, the daughter who endured everything so the peace in the house could survive. Behind me, Zoe called my name first, then Mason. But what made me stop for half a step wasn't either of them. It was Daniel. Aubrey, stop. For the first time in years, I heard real panic in his voice, and that alone told me the secret I was carrying wasn't just enough to ruin a birthday party, it was enough to tear this family apart. I left the house with my head burning hot and my hands ice cold. I don't remember how many streets I walked down. I only remember my heart pounding like it was trying to break out of my chest. When my phone buzzed, and Zoe Collins's name flashed on the screen, I stared at it for a few seconds before answering. I hadn't even managed to say anything before Zoe said, "Stay right there, I'm coming." Her voice was so steady it almost made me cry. Zoe picked me up outside a drugstore that closed late. She didn't press me with questions, didn't urge me to talk. She just unlocked the car and left a bottle of water waiting on the passenger seat. I got in and fastened my seatbelt with trembling fingers. We'd been driving for a while before Zoe glanced over at me and asked softly, "What else did they say?" The question made my throat tighten. I laughed, a dry, brittle sound that even I hated hearing. My mother handed me a gag gift box. Then she said I was never supposed to be born. Zoe's hands tightened around the steering wheel. She didn't throw out any of the usual comforting lines people use when they don't know what else to say. She was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "Aubrey, this didn't start today." I turned to look at her. Zoe kept her eyes on the road, but every word landed exactly where I had spent years refusing to look. Nobody blurts out something like that unless they've been carrying it around in their head for a very long time. I rested my head against the window. The anger started to settle, making room for something even scarier, clarity. I began telling Zoe the things I had always tried to rationalize away. How Noah Morgan was always called the pride of the family, while the things I heard were more like, "Don't make everything more difficult," or "You should learn to be a little more agreeable." Daniel Hughes was willing to spend whatever it took for Noah to study wherever he wanted, but with me, every need was weighed and measured like I was asking for too much. How Mia White looked at me whenever I accidentally ruined the mood, as if my presence had been the first mistake. Zoe took me back to her small apartment. The second I stepped inside, I felt some of the pressure in my head ease, not because the apartment was anything special, but because no one here looked at me like I was in error. I sat on the living room rug with my knees pulled to my chest, while Zoe sat across from me and let me speak in scattered fragments of memory. Once I said them out loud, I realized they weren't scattered at all. I remembered the family photos hanging along the hallway back at home, vacation pictures, Noah's graduation pictures, Christmas pictures, and a beach trip from years ago. In some of them, I wasn't there, and I was always told I'd been sick that day, or staying with family friends, or that I simply didn't like having my picture taken. When I was little, I believed all of it. Even when I got older, I made myself keep believing, because the easiest way to survive in a house like that was to treat every strange thing as normal. I also remembered one time Mia said to an older relative, thinking I couldn't hear, if that day hadn't happened, everything would have been different. The moment she saw me standing in the kitchen doorway, she changed her tone and said they were talking about money. Another time, I found an old card in a drawer. The top half had a congratulatory message for a day I was certain had something to do with me, but the bottom half had been torn away. In the corner, the date had been changed, in ink of a different color. At the time, I only stared at it for a few seconds before putting it back and telling myself not to read into it. When I finished, Zoe asked, "Do you still have anything connected to it?" I shook my head, but in my mind, I could already see old objects, Tiny details I had spent years forcing myself to forget. An unfinished message. A photograph taken out of an album. The time Mia snapped at me for asking about the day I was born, Daniel answered too quickly, saying, "There's nothing worth talking about," before walking out. On their own, those things looked like a coincidence. Side by side, they looked like a pattern too obvious to keep pretending not to see. Zoe leaned back against the couch and looked straight at me. "You're not imagining this, Aubrey. You were just taught to doubt yourself." That left me silent. For all these years, the thing that exhausted me most wasn't only being treated differently. It was that every time I felt something was wrong, they always made me believe I was too sensitive, too difficult, too prone to overthinking. I had gotten so used to defending them that I had forgotten I deserved to be believed too. My phone buzzed right then. A message from Naomi Harris lit up the screen. I opened it, and with each short line I read, my hands started to go cold again. "Aubrey, I just found an old letter in some of Aunt Mia's storage boxes. I'm not sure it proves the whole story, but someone tried to hide it a long time ago." Then the last line appeared, and it felt like an invisible hand had closed around my chest. "You need to see this letter right now, before they manage to take it back." The next morning, I had barely slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Mia's words again, like a dull blade sawing over the same place. "You were never supposed to be born." I must have asked myself a dozen times whether it had just been something vicious that slipped out in the heat of the moment, or something older, deeper, hidden for so long it had become part of who she was. By noon, when Zoe set a cup of coffee down in front of me and told me I needed to see Naomi Harris, I understood that I had crossed the point in my life where there was no going back. I met Naomi at a small diner behind an old bookstore. She had arrived before me, sitting straight-backed, both hands resting on a yellowed envelope. Just looking at it made my heart pound so hard that the tips of my fingers went numb. Naomi didn't waste time. She held my gaze for a long moment, as if she wanted to make sure I was strong enough to hear everything she was about to say. "I've kept it for a while," Naomi said, her voice low but steady. "At first, because I didn't think it was my place to interfere, but after that dinner, if I stay quiet now, I'm no different from them." I didn't ask anything right away. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth too soon, my voice would crack. Naomi slid the envelope toward me. The handwriting on it was instantly familiar. Mia White's. Neat and careful. The handwriting of someone who had spent her whole life needing everything to look orderly, to be in its proper place. I opened the letter with ice cold. Mia had written to Naomi years earlier, after some incident she never named directly. She only wrote that things had gone too far, that Daniel Hughes wanted to close this up as quickly as possible so this family can still be preserved, that if that baby stays, it will always be a reminder. There was one sentence crossed out halfway through, but I could still make it out. "We could have arranged it differently." Arranged it differently. Those words made me feel sick. I read the part about that baby over and over, as if my brain refused to understand it. No one wrote my name. No one called me a daughter, a sister, or part of the family. Just that baby, like I was a problem, that needed to be handled neatly before it stained the living room carpet. Naomi sat in silence and let me finish. Only when I looked up did she speak again. "Mia gave me that letter when she was in a very unstable state of mind," she said. "She told me she just needed to get it out of her head. But people don't write like that unless, somewhere inside, they've truly thought it before." I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw started to ache. That was when I finally understood that what she said on my birthday hadn't been a sudden stab of cruelty. It was the residue of a resentment that had been fed for far too long. So long that it only needed one opening to show its true face. I wasn't someone who accidentally ruined their happiness. I was the thorn they had reluctantly kept in the house for years. On the way out of the diner, my head filled with scraps of memory I had tried to ignore before. Every time I asked about my early childhood, Noah had always dodged the question. Whenever I pointed out how every family photo had him in the center, while I looked like I had been added in afterward, Noah would just give a flat little smile and tell me not to overthink it. And every time Mia looked at me with that irritated expression on occasions that should have been the warmest, Noah had been there too silent, not defending me, not cutting her off. That silence suddenly took on a different shape. It wasn't indifference anymore. It was complicity, I found Noah that evening. He was standing on the back porch, holding an unopened can of beer. When he saw me, he frowned, probably because one look at my face told him I wasn't there to fight about some small thing the way I had before. I pulled the letter from my jacket pocket and held it up in front of him. "What do you know about this?" Noah looked at the envelope, then at me. It lasted only a second, but I saw his face go pale. "Where did you get that?" "From Naomi." Don't answer a question with another question. I stepped closer, surprised by how cold my own voice sounded. "What she said yesterday, this letter, the way everyone's treated me all these years, don't tell me you knew nothing." Noah turned his face away. He squeezed the can in his hand so hard that the aluminum dented. "Aubrey, this is more complicated than you think." "Complicated for who? For me, or for the people who lied to me?" I pressed, my chest rising and falling with anger I had held down for too long. "How long have you known?" He said nothing. That silence was already my first answer. I stepped right up to him and forced him to look at me. "How long have you known, Noah?" This time he finally spoke, but his voice was low and uneasy, like even he knew the words about to leave his mouth would destroy whatever was left of this family's polite little performance. "I thought you already knew." My whole body went rigid. For one moment, it was as if every sound around me had been pulled away. I stared at Noah and understood that the thing hurting me most might not be what Daniel and Mia had done, but that my brother had known for a long time and still let me live as the only person locked outside the door to the truth of my own life. I asked Noah to meet me in the parking lot behind Zoe's apartment building. I didn't want to sit in a coffee shop. I didn't want music or the eyes of strangers cutting into this. Some conversations have to be as bare as the wound they come from. No pretty tables and chairs, no layer of politeness, no place for anyone to pretend they forgot. Noah showed up 10 minutes late. He got out of the car and stopped a few steps away from me, his face tight like he already knew this wasn't going to end quietly. I looked at him for a long time. The brother who had been there for almost every one of my worst memories. And yet for years, he had always managed to stand in the safest possible place, close enough to see, far enough that he never had to speak. I spoke first, my voice colder than I expected. "Do you remember my 12th birthday?" Noah blinked, but didn't answer. "You do. The weekend before that, they took you to a baseball game. On my birthday, Mom ordered a cake so small it wouldn't even feed 4 people once it was cut. Dad said that way it wouldn't be wasteful. You were sitting right there." Noah gripped the strap of his watch. "Aubrey, I don't remember everything the way you do. Of course not." I gave a humorless laugh. The one who gets forgotten always remembers more clearly than the one who gets chosen. I didn't let him cut in. All the years I had swallowed down came out today clean and sharp, without a tremor now. "Do you remember the dinner when I got the highest grade in my class?" Dad looked at my paper, then turned to ask how your elite team tryouts were going. "Do you remember my graduation, when Mom said my hair looked greasy so we shouldn't take too many pictures? Do you remember the time I sat crying in the bathroom because Mom said I ruined the mood in the house every time I opened my mouth? You walked past the door, you heard me." Noah swallowed hard. "I was a kid." "You were a kid, and then you grew up. But your silence grew up with you." That made the color drain from his face. For the first time, I saw Noah no longer knowing where to stand in this story. He wasn't the good son anymore. He wasn't the peacemaker. He was just someone who had witnessed too much and chosen the easiest way to live with it. He lowered his voice. "You think I had it easy? You think I wasn't under pressure too? Since I was little, all I heard was that I had to set an example, had to protect the family's image, and had to keep Mom and Dad happy in everything. If I slipped even a little, they crushed me too." I looked him straight in the eye. "Pressure doesn't make you my victim, Noah. It only explains why you were a coward. It does not explain why you left me alone in it." "Noah isn't the only one at fault," Mason said from behind us. I turned and only then saw Mason and Levi standing near Noah's car. Noah must have asked them to come, or maybe he knew he couldn't face this alone. Mason stepped a little closer, his voice low, trying to stay calm. "If you two keep going like this, it's all going to turn into another fight, and then nobody's going to say anything true." Levi stood beside him with his arms crossed, but his eyes were on me. "Some families only tell the truth when there's no way out left. If Aubrey doesn't say it today, this will stay buried." Noah frowned. "Levi, Don't pour gasoline on this. Levi shot back instantly. The fire's been here for a long time. You're just used to pretending you can't smell the smoke. I could see Noah starting to lose control. It was the first time he couldn't hold on to that familiar decent guy mask. He turned back to me, his voice sharper now. Fine. You want the truth? The day you were born was never just a normal birthday. My whole body went rigid. Noah looked away for a few seconds, then kept going, like every word was catching in his throat. Mom fell apart after that day, not because you did anything wrong, but because your arrival was tied to something Mom and Dad wanted buried. A scandal, something that nearly tore this family apart. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. What scandal? Noah shook his head. I don't know all of it. I just know that ever since we were kids, Mom has seen your birthday as the day everything broke open. They never looked at you like a child. They looked at you like a reminder of a shame they never dared to name. I stood there without moving, and the pain that hit me was so strange, it didn't even feel like pain anymore. It felt like a door inside my head had been kicked open. All those years, I kept asking myself what I had done wrong, and the answer had never been me. I wasn't the mistake. I had just been turned into a container for the adult's mistake. Mason let out a long breath. Levi swore under his breath, and I pulled out my phone right in front of Noah. What are you doing? He asked. I lifted my eyes to his. Going home. Aubrey, listen to me. This isn't the time. It's the first time it actually is, I said, typing each word. I sent a message to the family group chat, then held the screen up for Noah to read. Tonight I want the truth, and if no one says it, I will. Noah finished reading and his whole expression changed. He looked up at me like he had finally realized I was really going to do it. Not threaten. Don't say something reckless because I was angry. This time, I was going to walk into that house not to beg to be loved, but to force them to call the truth by its name, after hiding it my entire life. And just as I opened the car door, Noah's phone started vibrating. Mia's name lit up on the screen, over and over, urgent and relentless. Before Noah could even answer, another message flashed beneath it. Don't let Aubrey come home. She knows too much already. I didn't warn them before I came back home. This time, I wanted someone else to be the one caught off balance, not me. The moment the door opened, the familiar smell of food hit me, the same smell tied to dinners where I had to sit silently, reading everyone's mood before I dared reach for a single piece of vegetables. But tonight, I wasn't walking in like a daughter trying to earn a seat at the table. I set my bag down on a chair, stood straight in the middle of the dining room, and looked at each of them in turn. Daniel Hughes at the head of the table, Mia White sitting off to the left, Noah Morgan already there, his gaze heavy as stone. Daniel spoke first. He set down his fork, his voice low and hard, the kind of voice that had trained this whole house to keep quiet. If you came back to cause another scene, this ends here. I pulled out a chair, sat down slowly, and looked him right in the eye. No, tonight is where this starts, and this time, I'll be the one deciding where it ends. The air at the table turned solid. I saw Mia clutch the edge of her napkin so tightly her knuckles went white. She couldn't hold my gaze for long, and she didn't dare look at Daniel either. That fear was so familiar it sent a chill through me, because in that instant I understood something. All those years in this house, I wasn't the only one living in fear. From my bag, I took out the old envelope Naomi Harris had given me, the torn birthday card I had kept for years, and a small slip of paper covered in dates. I had pieced together like I was reconstructing the corpse of my own life. I laid them all in the middle of the table, a place usually reserved for serving dishes and meaningless small talk. Now we're going through this one thing at a time. I pushed the letter toward Mia first. You explain why this letter exists. Then I turned to Daniel. And don't tell me I misunderstood. Tonight, every time you try to dodge something, I'll drag you right back to it. Daniel glanced at the envelope, his jaw tightening. A pile of old papers doesn't prove anything. Good, I said, so calm I almost surprised myself. Then let's talk about the things that aren't on paper. Noah's birthdays were always big celebrations. Mine were always leftover gifts, half-hearted words, or some excuse about why the family was too busy. Every time I asked why everything was always different, Mom told me I was too sensitive. You told me I should be grateful that I at least still had a house to live in. Noah was protected, and I was taught to doubt my own memory. Noah sat still, but this time, he didn't look away. He stared at the things on the table as if he finally couldn't pretend they had never existed. I lifted my eyes and looked straight at Mia. I'm going to repeat it exactly. You were never supposed to be born. Was that something said in anger, or was that what you and Dad really thought about me all along? Mia sucked in a sharp breath. Daniel cut in immediately, his voice suddenly harsher. You're twisting everything. Your mother wasn't in her right mind then, and you picked one sentence and blew it out of proportion. I turned to him. Blew it out of proportion? Then explain this. Why did a sentence like that sound so natural that nobody in this house looked shocked? Why wasn't Noah surprised at all? Why did it hurt to hear it, but not feel unfamiliar? That last question landed on the dinner table like a hammer. Noah closed his eyes, the hand resting on his thigh curling slightly. Daniel shot to his feet. That's enough. You didn't come back here for the truth. You came back to humiliate this family. I stood too, my heart pounding so hard it hurt, but I didn't take my eyes off him. Wrong. I didn't come back here begging anyone to love me. I came back to take back the truth that all of you kept from me for all these years. And if this family's so-called honor was built on crushing one of its own children, then it deserved to be torn apart a long time ago. Mia suddenly broke down crying. It wasn't loud, but it made the whole room freeze. She covered her mouth with one hand, her whole body shaking as the outermost layer of her had just been ripped open. Daniel turned to her and said her name, through clenched teeth, a warning more than a call. But Mia didn't stop. For the first time in my life, I saw her lift her head and look him straight in the face. Don't, she said, her voice breaking. Don't make me quiet anymore. No one moved. Noah was stunned and silent. I felt my chest tighten, not from pain, but from something even more terrifying, a truth rising up through the ground right in front of me. For years, this house had not run on favoritism alone. It had run on fear, on threats, on secrets buried so deep people forgot how long they had been living bent under the weight of them. Mia wiped her tears away. Her red-rimmed eyes turned to me with a look I had never seen on her before, full of guilt, exhaustion, and the resignation of someone finally willing to pay the price to tell the truth. If you want to know why they treated you like that, she said, each word dropping heavily into the silence, then you have to hear the story from the beginning, the story I was forced to bury. The whole table fell into a thick, suffocating silence after I said the thing no one in this house had wanted to hear for years. Noah sat frozen, both hands clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his face cold, like he still believed that if he kept his voice hard enough, the truth would shrink on its own. Only Mia was different. She didn't look at anyone. She stared down at the edge of the table, eyes red. Like someone who had stood too long in front of a door she was terrified to open. Then she spoke, so quietly I had to hold my breath to hear her. The day I got pregnant with you, this marriage was already cracked. I didn't blink. Mia looked up, and for the first time, she met my eyes without looking away. Her face no longer had that expression of someone trying to smooth things over and make them pass. It looked like the face of someone who had finally understood that if she lied today, she would lose me forever. I was going to leave. Daniel and I were fighting all the time. All he cared about was how people outside this family would see us. Reputation, work, church, friends, business partners, everything mattered more than the truth. When I found out I was pregnant, instead of asking if I was okay, he asked what this would do to Noah, to this family's image. I heard the soft clink of a spoon against a plate, so faint, but in that silence it was sharp as a cut. Mia drew in a breath, and her voice started to shake. You were not a mistake, but you came at the exact moment everything was falling apart. And in this house, people needed something to dump it all on, so no one would have to look at the ugliest parts of themselves. You became the shadow of that time, a reminder of the fracture, of the things they wanted erased. I thought I was going to get angry again, but the anger didn't flare right away. It caught in my throat instead. For years, I had kept examining myself, asking what was wrong with me, what part of me was ugly, What made me so hard to love that my birthday was only worth a joke box and a cruel sentence? And now, right in front of me, the answer was so naked it made me sick. The fault had never been mine. I turned to Noah. He was staring at Mia like the floor beneath him had just slipped out of place. I understood why. If what she was saying was true, then I wasn't the only one who had grown up inside a twisted story. Noah had too. He had been raised on an edited version of history, one where he was the child who needed protecting, and I was the extra piece that had to be pressed smaller so everyone else in the house could breathe easier. Noah asked hoarsely, then why was she still here, if everyone wanted to forget her? Mia closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she looked straight at him. Because of you. Noah went still. My own heart missed a beat too. You were only 4. I had my suitcase by the back door after one of our fights. You wrapped your arms around my leg, then pointed at the baby in my stomach and cried. You said, "Don't leave the baby alone in the house with Dad." I remember every word. Then you took your teddy bear and put it on top of the suitcase and said if I left, I should take the baby with me, but leave the bear for the baby, so she wouldn't be scared. You were the first person who made me stop. Noah lifted a hand to cover his mouth. His eyes reddened almost instantly, the kind of red that comes when someone has just had a piece of memory they lost long ago thrown back at them. And I just sat there, stunned. In this warped house, there had once been a moment when someone chose me on instinct, before they knew how to calculate, before they knew how to stay silent to keep the peace. It didn't erase the years Noah spent saying nothing, but it changed the shape of my pain. It wasn't just being unwanted anymore. It was being abandoned after having once been kept. Noah looked at me, his voice breaking. Aubrey, I don't remember. I swear I don't remember. I gave a bitter little laugh, hot tears burning behind my eyes. But you grew up and got very good at forgetting. The air in the room was tipping toward a truth Daniel could no longer control. He suddenly shoved his chair back and stood. The scrape of the chair legs against the floor was enough to make my skin crawl. He looked at Mia with an expression I had never seen before, furious and panicked at the same time, as she had just smashed the one thing he had spent his whole life protecting. How much more are you planning to tell? He said, his voice razor, cold. Or are you only telling the parts that help you? Mia went pale. I turned to Daniel. He planted both hands on the table and leaned toward us. Yes, this family was in crisis back then. Yes, I cared about our reputation, because someone had to think about the fallout out there. But don't sit here and act like you were the only victim. He pointed straight at Mia. Go on, tell them who first asked for everything to be hidden. Tell them who rewrote this story, so she wouldn't have to face what she had done. The room seemed to tighten around us. Mia didn't answer. Noah looked from him to her, completely lost. And I had barely managed to pick up one piece of the truth when Daniel threw another one at me, sharper, more dangerous. I hadn't even had time to breathe before Daniel looked me straight in the eye and said, If you want to hear the whole truth, then ask your mother who really started this lie. I used to think that once I heard the full truth about the day I was born, I'd feel a little lighter. But standing in that dining room felt like standing between two winds, blowing in opposite directions, both cold, both trying to pull me toward them. Daniel spoke in the voice of a man who saw himself as the victim, cornered with nowhere left to go. He talked about pressure, about work, about pride, about how he had to carry a family that was already cracking apart. He spoke as if his life had been some kind of wrongful sentence, and everything I'd been given all those years was just an unfortunate consequence. I looked at him for a long time, long enough to realize that what hurt most wasn't the confession anymore. What hurt most was that he was still defending himself, still trying to turn cruelty into a kind of helplessness people should sympathize with. Mia was different. She didn't fight back the way Daniel did. She sat there, shoulders sagging as if they'd gone numb from bracing for too many years. I knew she had hidden things, avoided things, left me alone inside this very house, and every time she stayed silent, she helped turn me into a child who always felt like the extra piece no one wanted. But when I looked into her eyes, I didn't see calculation. I saw fear, an old fear that had bent a woman out of shape for so many years, that she had lost even the ability to protect her own child. That didn't erase what she had done, but it made one thing painfully clear to me. The full truth wasn't clean for anyone in this house. The only difference was that I was the one who had paid for it the longest. Daniel drew in a sharp breath. this family before you're satisfied. I laughed, a dry, exhausted sound. I'm tormenting this family. I'm the one who got turned into a joke on my own birthday. I'm the one who was told I never should have existed. And somehow, even now, the person you feel sorriest for is still yourself. He slammed his hand on the table. Watch your mouth. When was I ever disrespectful, Dad? Do you remember? I asked, my voice calm enough to feel icy. Or do you only remember what it feels like to be challenged, and not how you've treated me? Noah, who had been sitting there in silence like he'd been nailed to his chair, suddenly looked up. I saw his throat work hard before he spoke. Dad, enough. Daniel whipped around, stunned. Don't interrupt. I have to, Noah said, his voice rough. Because I've known part of this for a long time. I looked at Noah. For a second, I thought I had heard him wrong. He didn't look at me right away. He kept his eyes on Daniel, as if he turned toward me then, he wouldn't be able to get the words out. I didn't know everything, he went on, but I knew enough to understand that Aubrey did not deserve to be treated like that. I stayed quiet. I was a coward. I was selfish because in this house, I was the one who got favored, so I told myself not to dig any deeper. I thought staying quiet was how I kept the peace. But really, all I did was let this keep crushing her. No one said anything. The room went so still I could hear Mia breathing too fast. Daniel looked at Noah as if he were looking at a traitor. You're taking her side? Noah answered, each word falling heavy and clean. I'm standing on the side of what's right. The way you and Mom have treated Aubrey all these years has been cruel. It's been wrong. On her birthday, that gift wasn't a joke. It was humiliation. I didn't forgive Noah just because of a few sentences, and I hadn't forgotten all the times he turned away and left me behind with the feeling that I was the one person no one wanted there. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't asking me to understand his pressure, wasn't telling me to let it go so the family could stay peaceful. He stood in front of them and called things by their real names. That alone was enough to make the whole house shake differently. Near the kitchen door, Zoe Collins stepped forward, her eyes still on me. Aubrey doesn't have to out-argue anybody in this room to be seen as someone with value. If she says stop, then everybody stops. Naomi Harris stood beside Zoe, her voice quieter but firm. The truth didn't destroy this family. The way all of you lived with the truth is what destroyed it. Mason Marshall crossed his arms and spoke slowly, decisively. This has already gone too far. If anyone here is still trying to turn this into a misunderstanding, then they're choosing to lose Aubrey. Levi Bennett was the one who said the last thing, short enough that no one could dodge it. Either admit it or lose her tonight. I looked at each of them, then back at Daniel and Mia. Suddenly, the ridiculous gift box from my birthday flashed through my mind, so light in weight, and yet sharp as a blade. I realized that what had been choking me ever since that day wasn't just the gift itself. It was the message buried inside it. That I should know my place. That I should accept being diminished. That I should laugh along so everyone else could stay comfortable. I stood up slowly. What's really funny, I said, without taking my eyes off Daniel, isn't that stupid joke box. What's really funny is that you think you have the right to define the value of my life. That because I was born in this house, I'm supposed to keep enduring whatever you do to me and never have the right to leave. Daniel shot to his feet too. If you walk out that door today, don't come back. I nodded. I wasn't shaking anymore. That would be the first choice I ever got to make for myself. I picked up my bag. Zoe shifted aside to clear a path for me. Noah stepped back, his face full of regret, but he didn't try to stop me. Mason and Levi stayed where they were, close enough to let me know I wasn't walking out alone. Naomi looked at me with the kind of certainty that felt like a reminder. Leaving was not losing. I walked to the door, each step heavy and strangely bright with clarity. The house behind me was still the same old house, but I was no longer the child who used to stand in the hallway, wondering what she had done wrong to be hated this much. My hand had just touched the doorknob when, behind me, Mia's voice broke like a shard of glass. Aubrey, wait. I stopped. There's one last thing I have to confess, she said, her voice catching, and that's what you need to take with you before you walk out of this house. Mia was the first to speak after Daniel finally stopped trying to turn himself into the victim. She sat still for a long time, so long that I thought she was going to choose that familiar silence again, the same silence that had fed every wound in this house. But then she lifted her head and looked at me with eyes that had run out of both resistance and excuses. "There's something I never dared to fully say," she said, her voice rough and hoarse. "It wasn't just once. There were so many times I wanted to pull you away from the way he treated you. But every time, I was afraid. Afraid the family would fall apart. Afraid of losing what I depended on. Afraid of having to admit I had let everything go too far. What I regret most isn't that I was weak. What I regret most is that I let you grow up feeling like you were a mistake." I listened to each word as it fell, heavy, but no longer cutting straight through me the way it used to. Maybe because I had finally reached the last missing piece, the piece I had been searching for through all those years of asking myself how much better I had to be, how much more well-behaved, how much more accomplished, before I would deserve to be treated like someone's daughter. It turned out that from the beginning, the problem had never been me. I took a long, deep breath. I'm hearing this, not so I can come back and pretend none of it ever happened. I'm hearing it so that from today on, I stop punishing myself. Mia broke down crying. I didn't run to hold her. I was no longer the child who had to rush in and patch up an adult's emotions in exchange for a little kindness. Her tears were real, but they could not wash clean the years I had lived under the shadow of one cruel sentence. I turned to Daniel. He was still sitting there, rigid as a wall that believed it could never collapse. I looked him straight in the eye, and this time I wasn't shaking. "From now on, you do not get to tell the story of my life in whatever way serves you. You do not get to call me a burden, a mistake, or the consequence of a failed marriage. What you did was your choice, and I will not carry it for you anymore." Daniel pressed his lips together, his gaze darkening. For a second, it looked like he was about to cut me off, about to grab back control with that voice I knew too well. But Noah spoke first. "Dad, don't." Just 2 words, and the whole room went still. I turned to Noah. For the first time in years, I didn't see him avoiding my eyes. He stepped toward me, slow but certain. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Noah said. "I stayed silent for too long, and that silence stood with the people who hurt you. I can't undo the past, but I can do the right thing from here on. If you still want to leave, I'll help you move your things. Find a temporary place to stay, handle paperwork, whatever you need." I looked at him for a long time. Once, I had wanted him to speak up for me. Just one time. Just once. He hadn't. So today, I couldn't suddenly feel light just because he had finally said the right things too late. But I was clear-headed enough to understand that real change does not always arrive in a form that looks beautiful. Sometimes it comes very late, very awkwardly, but not without a price. "Okay," I said. "Help me with what needs to be done. The rest, time can answer for itself." Zoe and Naomi came to pick me up late that afternoon. When they walked into the house, I suddenly understood that family is not always the place where you were born. Some people make you feel respected, simply by listening without judging, by staying beside you without forcing anything. Zoe took the box from my hands, and Naomi stood by the door, looking at me like she wanted to remind me that I did not have to turn back if I wasn't ready. Mia stood near the stairs, her hands clenched together. I looked at her one last time. "I'm not promising I'll forgive you soon. If you want there to be one door left open between us, it only opens with honesty and real change. Not with today's tears." She nodded, crying without saying another word. I carried the last bag outside. No one tried to stop me. Daniel said nothing more, maybe because for the first time, he understood that the greatest power he had ever had over me was making me doubt my own worth, and that power had just ended. When the door closed behind me, I didn't feel like I was walking away. I felt like I was moving forward. I was not being born again by any miracle. I gave birth to myself again through boundaries, through truth, through the decision not to keep living as someone else's joke. And for the first time in my life, I was not leaving that house as a rejected daughter. I was leaving as someone who knew with absolute certainty that I had never been a mistake.